Flash floods have hit parts of Saudi Arabia as heavy rainfall has been recorded across the kingdom since last week.
Hey there! So, you probably already know that Saudi Arabia is known for being home to the biggest sand desert around, with a super harsh climate and hardly any rainfall. But how's Saudi Arabia dealing with these tough conditions? Today, we're going to share something pretty amazing that'll blow your mind. It's unlike anything you've ever seen. The agricultural progress in Saudi Arabia has left people worldwide in awe. Scientists everywhere are tuning in to this video to learn all about it. If you take a closer look at Saudi Arabia's history, you'll find it's a country in Western Asia, previously called the State of Saudi Arabia. It's the second largest Arab nation in the region and covers most of the Arabian Peninsula. With an area of about 2,150,000 square kilometers, it's also the fifth largest country in Asia. But here's a fun fact. Despite its popularity, Saudi Arabia has been struggling with desertification for quite a while. The country has a mix of forests, grasslands, mountains, and deserts, so the landscape is pretty diverse. Temperatures can vary a lot, too. In the summer, it can soar over 110 degrees Fahrenheit, while in the northern and central parts, it can drop below freezing in winter. But recently, something incredible has happened. Saudi Arabia has embraced modern tech to tackle its issues and transform many desert areas into lush farmland. Typically, Saudi Arabia only gets about 4 inches of rain a year. Even though 97% of the population has access to drinking water, they're facing a serious water shortage problem, with only 89.5 cubic meters of water produced per person each year. The kingdom has high water access rates, but overconsumption and a lack of reliable renewable water sources have made this a major concern. While oil is often seen as the most precious resource there, water is quickly becoming more valuable due to these challenges. The main sources of water are the oceans and groundwater, both of which are running low. Interestingly, 98% of all naturally occurring freshwater is underground, and both sources make up 50% of the water used in the country. So, how is Saudi Arabia managing water scarcity when it comes to agriculture? Over the past 30 years, agriculture in the country has made some serious leaps. Can you believe that in a place with one of the lowest rainfall rates in the world, large parts of the desert have been turned into farmland? Nowadays, Saudi Arabia exports all kinds of products around the world, like wheat, dates, dairy, eggs, fish, poultry, fruits, vegetables, and even flowers. Once a staple in the Saudi diet, dates are now mainly grown for international aid. The Ministry of Agriculture mainly handles agricultural policy, but there are other organizations involved too, like the Grain Silos and Flour Mills Organization, which buys and stores wheat, runs flour mills, and produces livestock feed. Then there's the Saudi Arabian Agricultural Bank, which gives out subsidies and interest-free loans. Plus, the government pitches in by funding research projects and managing land distribution and reclamation programs. The private sector has also played a big role in boosting agriculture in the kingdom. This has been super important, thanks to government initiatives that offer long-term interest-free loans, technical help, support services, financial perks like free fertilizer and seeds, cheap water, fuel, and electricity, and duty-free equipment and materials. So, that's the scoop on how Saudi Arabia is turning things around in agriculture despite its challenges. So, when you think about the Arabian Peninsula, you might picture a lot of desert, and you wouldn't be wrong. Except for a little coastal area in the southwest, farming in this region used to be all about growing dates and some veggies in scattered oases. Local folks managed to get enough food from their small plots, and any extras were sold to passing caravans. But things really started to change in the 1970s. The government kicked off a big push for agriculture, building rural roads, irrigation systems, storage, and export facilities. They also got serious about supporting agricultural research and training. Because of all this, the production of staple foods shot up. Now, Saudi Arabia is totally self-sufficient in things like meat, milk, and eggs. Water is super important for farming in Saudi Arabia. The government found a way to provide the massive water supplies needed for this agricultural boom. They built a network of dams to catch and use those valuable periodic floods, dug deep wells, and tapped into huge underground water reservoirs. Plus, they set up desalination plants to turn ocean water into fresh water for cities and industries, which helped keep other water sources available for farming. They even put in infrastructure to manage industrial and urban runoff for irrigation. As a result, they've turned large parts of the desert into productive farmland. Back in 1976, there were fewer than 400,000 acres of farmland. Fast forward to the 21st century, and that number has skyrocketed to millions of acres. It's pretty wild that even though most of Saudi Arabia is desert, there are actually a lot of native plant species that can thrive in such a tough climate. Now, with the Saudi Green Initiative (SGI) in full swing, they're working on preserving and boosting vegetation all over the kingdom, from the northern deserts to the southern region of Asia. The place is home to over 2,000 wild plant species from 142 families. But here's the catch. About 600 of these species are endangered, and 21 are already thought to be extinct. The SGI has recently launched the biggest tree planting project in the country's history, aiming to plant 450 million trees in the coming years. So far, they've already planted around 10 million trees across all 13 regions of the kingdom. When you think of Saudi Arabia, forests might not be the first thing that pops into your head. But believe it or not, there are about 2.7 million hectares of woodland, mainly in the hard-to-reach mountains of Ava and Isa in the southwest. It might sound a bit crazy to plan for planting 450 million trees, especially with how quickly cities are growing, but the Saudi government has set up specific goals with the SGI to blend green spaces into urban development. They're looking to create parks and green areas to help counteract the negative effects of urban sprawl. This will not only help slow down global warming, but also cut down on carbon emissions, improve air quality, encourage more active lifestyles, and make cities look nicer. In rural areas, though, these greening projects have to deal with challenges like encroaching deserts, dwindling water supplies, and super high temperatures, all of which are linked to climate change caused by humans. The SGI roadmap is all about protecting the kingdom's unique biodiversity, fighting against desertification and soil degradation, and keeping the country's limited water resources safe, especially where there's not enough rain and groundwater is running low. Right now, there are 15 protected areas in Saudi Arabia, with 12 on land and 3 in the sea, all thanks to their unique biodiversity. The National Center for Wildlife has plans to bump that number up to 75, with 62 of those on land and 13 in coastal and aquatic spots. The King Salman World Nature Reserve in northern Saudi Arabia covers about 6% of the kingdom's total area and is home to around 300 different animal species, plus some rare archaeological sites dating back to 8000 BC. It's got everything from mountains to vast plains and high plateaus. Recently, the Reserves Administration teamed up with volunteers to plant 100,000 seedlings as part of an initiative by the Reserves Authority and partners to support their environmental goals. Saudi Arabia is really committed to greening up the place, having already planted 600,000 plants and run numerous seed sowing campaigns to boost vegetation in the reserves. The focus is on perennial trees and shrubs that help restore ecosystems affected by desert conditions. These plants are perfect for the desert because they've adapted to survive in tough environments, dealing with drought and high heat. Plus, they don't need much water for irrigation. The main nursery setup is just one piece of the puzzle in their strategic plan to kick off a seeding program. But water is still a big challenge for conservation and green projects in the kingdom. Over the years, people in the Arabian Peninsula dug fresh water wells to survive, especially after the economic boom in the 1970s. Saudis started using modern farming techniques and tapping into groundwater resources. The country built seawater desalination plants along its eastern and western coasts to support inland cities. With no rivers or natural lakes and very little rainfall, they're facing a growing demand for fresh water, and natural aquifers are drying up fast. So, the Saudi government is exploring ways to better protect and use its water resources to keep up with the needs of a growing economy while maintaining lush green areas. Maria Nava, a scientific advisor for Greening Arabia at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology Center for Desert Agriculture, mentioned that the strategic team is likely looking into using treated wastewater for watering the newly planted greenery. She also pointed out that they want to cut down on water loss from rainfall going to the sea or through sand infiltration by improving water harvesting techniques and enhancing soil to retain water where needed. Nava noted that plants in urban areas usually need a lot more water and can't provide the same shade as those in mountainous or desert climates. The vegetation in those areas requires less water compared to drought-resistant trees with fewer leaves. Agriculture changes have also shifted the traditional diet in the nation, bringing in a wider variety of local foods that weren't even on the table a few generations back. Dates used to be a major staple in Saudi Arabia, but they're not as central to the diet anymore. Out of the 450 different types of dates produced each year, around 500,000 tons are grown, and a big chunk goes to international humanitarian aid. Every year, tens of thousands of tons of dates are donated to help combat famine and food shortages, mainly through the World Food Program. The World Food Program, WFP, is part of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And there's this factory in Al-Azhar that's all about producing dates for foreign aid. The food assistance from the WFP, backed by Saudi Arabia, has really helped a lot of countries, making the kingdom the second biggest donor to this initiative after the US. The Saudi government has rolled out a bunch of initiatives like offering soft loans with low interest and providing technical support, which have really boosted the agricultural sector over the last few years. They've made water, fuel, and electricity cheap, and even offer duty-free imports for equipment and raw materials. Plus, they give tax breaks for up to 10 years to foreign partners teaming up with Saudi individuals or businesses, along with extra incentives since the investment rules changed in April 2000. The Ministry of Agriculture is the main player when it comes to agricultural policy, helping farmers with research and support. There's also the Saudi Arabian Agricultural Bank, Sahab, which gives out assistance and interest-free loans to help build flour mills, stockpile wheat, and create animal feed to grow the agriculture scene across the country. The Grain Silos and Flour Mills Organization has been around since 1972, and Saudi Arabia has put a lot of money into improving the roads that connect farming areas to markets, encouraging private investment in agriculture. There's also the Land Distribution and Reclamation Program that started in 1968, aimed at giving out free fallow land in small plots to boost farming within 2 to 5 years. Farmers need to cultivate at least 25% of the land, and if they do, they get full ownership, which focuses on diversifying crops and improving efficiency. The government keeps supporting new farmers as they take on capital-heavy projects in their development plans. They're also funding research to create new food crops and plant strains that resist pests better, all happening at agricultural research centers in Saudi universities. This collaboration between local farmers and scientists is pretty impressive, especially for a country that imports 90% of its fresh food. They've turned the harsh Arabian desert into a thriving orchard thanks to adding clay and water. On the flip side, parts of Egypt's Nile Delta started struggling in the 1980s, even though it used to be a reliable farming area known for its fertility. The ancient Egyptians had moved from basic farming to building a strong civilization that led to cultural achievements that are still celebrated today. But in just a few short years, that fertility disappeared, which was a big deal since the Nile used to flood the delta every late summer, spreading minerals and nutrients, including clay, that kept the soil rich. So, where did all that clay go? Well, flashback to 10 years ago in the 1960s, when southern Egypt built the 1 rupee dam across the Nile to produce electricity and control flooding, making farming easier. This massive structure is 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers wide, but it also stopped the flow of all that good stuff downstream. Without that annual refresh, the fertility in the estuary soils started to fade after about 10 years. Soil scientists and engineers figured out what was going on and began to look for solutions. El Severson, the CEO of Desert Control, a Norwegian company that developed this cool nano-clay method, says thin soils with little organic matter can't hold moisture well for plants. But with the right amount of clay, everything can change. Using nano-clay can really change the game for barren desert areas, turning sand into something hopeful. Farmers have been using clay to boost their soils for ages, so it's not exactly a new idea. The catch is that the traditional methods have been super labor-intensive and not great for the underground ecosystems, since working heavy clay into the soil can be pretty destructive. Plus, plowing and digging up the ground can release stored carbon back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which isn't great for the environment. As Sarah and Cody, a social scientist from the University of Edinburgh, point out, tilling the soil messes with the delicate soil biome. Did you know that Saudi Arabia is on the lookout for something that could be even more valuable than oil? For the last 24 years, they've been tapping into underground water supplies to grow wheat and other crops in the Syrian desert. NASA and the USGS have some cool satellite images that show how the desert's greenery is thriving thanks to water that was trapped during the last ice age. This fossil water fills aquifers that are buried deep under the desert sands, along with rainwater that has fallen over hundreds of thousands of years. By drilling into the desert floor, Saudi Arabia can access these underground rivers and lakes and irrigate their crops using a sprinkler system known as center pivots. Water is a precious resource here since rainfall is barely a few centimeters, around an inch a year. Hydrologists think it'll only be cost-effective to pump water for about 50 years, but no one really knows how much is hidden beneath the arid land. The agricultural areas span about a kilometer, or 62 miles, and the Landsat images capture different wavelengths of light to show healthy crops in bright green, dry plants in orange, urban areas in purple, and barren soil in dark pink. There are various irrigation methods, like micro-irrigation, which uses small amounts of water right by the plants, or sprinkler systems that spray water. Gravity systems can flood fields or use furrows to channel water. Farmers can avoid overwatering by timing their irrigation schedules better. They can also use modern tools like soil moisture sensors, smartphone apps, and remote irrigation controls to boost their profits. Effective irrigation systems can help farmers get more crops while cutting down on costs. While we didn't find much evidence that water conservation is a major reason for adopting new tech. Making more money and reducing risks are definitely big motivators for farmers. However, things like small farm sizes, high costs, and a lack of knowledge about these technologies can hold them back from using more efficient options. Connectivity issues, like poor internet access in rural areas, can also be a barrier to using precision agriculture tools. Since launching in 1982, Landsat 4 provided a ton of scientific data until 1993. Landsat 5, launched in 1984, lasted an impressive 28 years, sending back its last likely data in 2011. Landsat 7 kicked off in 1999 and is still up and running. Thanks to these satellites, we've learned a lot about forest health, storm damage, agriculture, urban growth, and other changes happening on our land. Landsat is a joint effort between NASA and the U.S. Department of the Interior through the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, which keeps a 40-year archive of Landsat images available online for anyone to check out. Talking about how agriculture is a goldmine in Saudi Arabia's desert, it's interesting to note that 1/3 of the world's land is desert, which means very little rainfall, poor sandy soil, extreme heat, strong winds, and a heavy reliance on often non-renewable groundwater. Still, millions of people depend on deserts for their livelihoods. But the food networks and biodiversity in these areas are at risk, which is why we need a solid plan to change desert agriculture for the better. A group called EDIO is working on designing and promoting integrated desert family farming systems that mix traditional farming methods with nature-based solutions and affordable tech. According to Dr. Jack Weary, the Deputy Director of Research at Takeda, innovative technologies like net houses, hydroponics, and drip irrigation systems are helping to boost crop yields while using less water and energy. So, it turns out that the impact of integrating new tech with local know-how and getting everyone involved, from the public and private sectors to farmers, is way bigger than any single effort. Did you know that 44% of the world's food, including half of all livestock, comes from dry areas? Out of the 2.7 billion people living in these dry lands, about 40 million are in actual deserts, which usually get less than 100 millimeters of rain a year. For many countries in these regions, desert farming is pretty much the only way to grow food and create jobs in agriculture. But here's the catch. A bunch of factors are coming together to create a tough situation for desert farming. Family farmers are facing a lot of challenges, like climate change, growing populations, bad land management, crazy temperatures, poor soil quality, not enough organic matter, water shortages, salt buildup, wind erosion, high evaporation, and being cut off from markets and energy sources. Despite all this, years of research and tech advancements mean that desert farming isn't just stuck in isolated spots anymore. It's really making progress, even if some technologies and crops are still lagging behind. Interestingly, the amount of water farmers use with more efficient systems stays about the same. For example, when farms switch to micro-irrigation for things like orchards and vineyards, they actually end up using less water per acre. This efficient tech allows farmers to either irrigate more land or switch to water-loving crops, which can sometimes lead to using even more water. In the US, there's a big push to reduce the impact of irrigated agriculture in places struggling with water shortages, and the GAO has come up with some suggestions for federal policymakers. First up, they recommend promoting better irrigation practices and equipment, like irrigation scheduling. Next, they suggest using precision agriculture tools, like weather monitors and soil moisture sensors. In lots of areas, farming is spreading into marginal and degraded desert lands that used to be seen as unusable for food production. The progress in desert agriculture is mainly thanks to a solid mix of modern farming practices and technologies developed by research groups like CGIAR, which is the world's biggest agricultural research network, plus some interest from private businesses. With things like desalination tech, renewable energy, especially solar, and water-saving technologies, it's now possible to grow food even in super dry conditions. Plus, many countries and governments are stepping up with policies that support desert farming to cut down on food imports and boost exports of high-value goods like organic produce. This includes growing things like veggies, dates, irrigated forages, rehabilitating rangelands, protected agriculture, livestock, and even fish. However, because it hardly ever rains, raising livestock and growing crops or trees in the desert really relies on pumping water from aquifers for irrigation. That makes water the most crucial element in desert farming, and it's a huge challenge. In some areas, the only water available is either non-renewable or too salty for crops. So, if we want to expand desert farming, we've got to focus on long-term groundwater management. What do you think about this shift in Saudi Arabia? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, go ahead and do that, hit the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, and check out more of our videos. Catch you next time.